everyone. Good morning. As you are taking your seats and quietening down, we're going to make a start. Otherwise, we will never get through this program this morning. And I'm so sorry. I can hear the buzz in the room and it's super, super exciting. Hola y bienvenidos. And don't worry, I'm not going to try in any more Spanish because I would butcher it. Welcome to Barcelona and to this amazing event that we're here today. We are speaking in English, but I want to stress that today is a very international event. We have speakers from all over the world who have joined us today. I'd like to welcome you, and I would like to say that it is a huge pleasure and a massive honor to be able to chair today's inaugural presentation of the International Journal of the Social Determinants of Health and Health Services. Now, my name is Dr. Guddi Singh. I'm a pediatrician, I'm a health campaigner, and I'm also a visiting researcher here at the Johns Hopkins UPF Public Policy Center, which is hosting today's event. And we are here to celebrate because, just like Madonna and Tom Cruise before it, the journal understood the need to rebrand in its 50s. So what originally started as the International Journal of Health Services has now, after 53 years, become the International Journal of Social Determinants of Health and Health Services. But why bother with a rebrand? What is so important about the social determinants of health? Well, as a frontline clinician working in London, I can tell you why, because I've seen it all. I've seen stab wounds from knife crime. I've seen overdoses from drugs I can't pronounce. And I've dealt with the terror of being denied personal protective equipment during an airborne global pandemic, otherwise known as coronavirus. But what I will never forget is Jordan. Jordan was a 4-year-old girl who was brought to the emergency department at 3 a.m. by her single mother. They'd been waiting more than 3 hours to see me, and they kept waiting because her mother couldn't deal with her daughter's incessant coughing. Why? Because she had to get some sleep. She had 2 jobs to hold down if she was going to be able to afford her rent. Now, in fact, when I saw her, she said to me, "I've got a job starting in a couple of hours, so just give me the antibiotics, let me go home." But when I looked at Jordan, what did I see? I could see the bowed legs of rickets. I could see skin rashes of pellagra. These are Dickensian diseases that I should not be seeing in the Britain of the 21st century. And although Jordan is 4 years old, if you were to talk to her, you might think she was only 1, because it turns out you don't learn to say very much when you've been left alone all day. Meanwhile, when I'm looking at the department board, I can see that I have less than half an hour to deal with this patient before I am going to get into serious trouble. That is the state of child health in the UK today, in 2023. And what I will never forget is that despite living in the 6th richest economy in the world, as a doctor, I knew that there was nothing I can do to help them. And this is a story that is repeated the world over. As a pediatrician or as a doctor, the job description on the tin is treating the sick child or the sick person, but it doesn't matter how many children I treat. I'm never going to get to the bottom of today's health challenges if we don't get to the root of the problem, because a kid can't be healthy if the context they're in is sick. The social determinants of health affect every single part of a person's life from cradle to grave. And you cannot be serious about health if you are not serious about the social determinants of health. And it was that realization that led me to health research and inequalities. And it's the reason why I'm here. It's also the reason why you're here. In a world of extreme inequalities, multiple interconnected social and ecological crises, it feels like my patients can never be well. And that is why a home for critical, interdisciplinary, systemic perspectives on complex health problems has never been more urgent and has never been more important. Hence this journal. Now I'm going to shortly hand over to the new co-editors-in-chief of exactly that, the International Journal of the Social Determinants of Health and Health Services. Longest name ever, by the way, guys. But before we get to that, as chair, I get to deliver the most important part of the day, which is the housekeeping, because we all know that you've already been wondering where the toilets are, and they are out to the right, down that way, or also out that way through the atrium. I also know that you've already been trying to get onto the Wi-Fi. I know, because I've seen you all struggling. If you've been reading your programs, as you should have done, you'll find that there is a way to get onto the Wi-Fi on page 11. And of course, I do want you to go on the Wi-Fi because I want you to get on social media, because as much as we're going to have an amazing conversation within these 4 walls, we want this conversation to continue outside, beyond Barcelona, across the world. So use the hashtag, which is again, incredibly long, IJSDOHS 2023, to communicate with the rest of the world and use our Twitter handles as well. On a serious note, we are in Barcelona, and I have been advised to tell you to please keep your personal belongings on your person while you're here. But it turns out that the thieves are not just human, and allegedly the seagulls around here have been known to attack anyone who's got food outside. You have been warned. So without further ado, it's time to begin today's proceedings. So allow me to introduce here our first panel. We have Josep Lluís Martí, who is the Commissioner for the Planetary Wellbeing Project and who represents Universitat, Pompeu Fabra, who is hosting us today. Next to him, we have Joan Benach, who is the Johns Hopkins University Pompeu Fabra Public Policy Director, as well as being a sociologist, and he is a co-editor-in-chief of the journal. And next to him, we have Carles Muntaner of the University of Toronto, and who is the other co-editor-in-chief of the journal. So please, can you join me in giving them a warm welcome?
Good morning, everybody. So as Guddi was saying, my name is Josep Lluís, hard to pronounce for those who are not Catalans. You can call me Josep, not easier, or Jose, I don't know. I'm commissioner, as Guddi said, I'm commissioner for the project of planetary well-being here at the university. The first thing I want to say is that I want to welcome you all to this university, to Barcelona. In the name of the rector, the president of the university, Laia de Nadal. Unfortunately, she was unable to come here personally at this time, but she wants you to feel at home. Our university is open to everybody, and especially for initiatives like this. We are so happy that you chose UPF to come here to present the journal. I'm also glad that we are, as Guddi said, we are following the path of Madonna and others in rebranding the name of the journal. And I will be very brief, but I want to say a couple of things only. One is just a few words about the project of on planetary well-being, which I feel comes very close to the scope of the journal and the objectives of the journal. The university in late 2017, under the former rector Jaume Casals, launched this project on planetary well-being. Basically with the idea that a research institute, a research center like a university has should have a very deep commitment in doing research related to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, but also in this new way of, which is desperately urgent, this new way of conducting research, which is deeply, seriously transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary. We all talk about interdisciplinarity all the time, but we all know, all researchers know that this is it's very, very difficult to do. We are always struggling to try to push for more interdisciplinarity. It's the only way to go for many things. And I think that it's fantastic to have a tradition in a field like public policy or public policy, public health, particularly policy oriented to health issues. It has been a field that it's inherently interdisciplinary. So I think that we have many things to learn from what you have done in the journal so far, and also what you want to do in the future. And for that reason, we feel that our projects are very close to each other. And I'm very glad actually to be here with you and just saying hello and welcoming you. Myself, I'm a lawyer, political scientist, and philosopher. So I've done some interdisciplinarity in my own career. And always when I hear cases like Jordan's case that Guddi was saying now, my usual feeling was, so these are the important things, right, in life. What I do, philosophy or even law, I mean, who cares about that? Because I work on banal and irrelevant things like freedom and democracy. But seriously, I always thought, if I always feel stressed. And one of the things that I think when I'm stressed is, in the end, I'm not a doctor. So nobody's life is depending on my work today or something like this. But that's a mistake, I think. And I think that's exactly the clue for interdisciplinarity. I think that we all need to work together, and we are all working on very serious and important things. So for that reason, again, I said that I was going to be brief. thank you very much for coming. Feel yourselves at home here at the university. Be aware of the pickpockets. I was robbed my backpack 2 weeks ago, so this is not a myth, this happens. So be aware of that. But other than that, you know that Barcelona is very friendly, and I hope that you will have a very nice time here. So thank you very much. Have a fantastic and rewarding journey today, and thank you for coming. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome all to the presentation of this event, this International Journal of Social Determinants of Health and Health Services. Thank you all very much for attending this meeting, either here or, you know, or online. That unfortunately, I think it's not possible today, but watching it in a recorded version. I want to speak briefly about some of the ideas that are behind the main points that the journal is trying to cover. We live in disturbing times, times of profound change. Global developments of the last decade, such as the reported drop in life expectancy before and after COVID-19 in some rich countries, new pandemics like obesity, diabetes, all sorts of addictions, and the multiple effects generated by several wars and the climate and ecological crisis, mostly in low-income countries, but also in middle and high-income countries. All of these have increased health inequities at the local, national, and global levels. Today, I think there is an urgent need to respond to these global challenges that represent existential threats to global health and health equity. Yet these problems do not exist naturally. Science is crystal clear. They are human-made by mainly political, economic arrangements, social, cultural contexts, political choices. The examples of policies and developments that are making the goal of achieving health for all in a livable planet an increasingly elusive need include many. For example, the increasing financialization of the economy, the concentration of private economic power, and the growth of neoliberalism, austerity policies, the global expansion of work precarization, the rapid and worrisome unequal changes in the techno-scientific revolution, the growing emergence of authoritarianism, and also population surveillance and control. Yet it is important to not only to see how and why this is occurring, but also to identify who is responsible. 5 years ago, at the COP24 in Poland, a 15-year-old Swedish adolescent, Greta Thunberg, said, quote, "Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine, Sweden, can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past, and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses, and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know the change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people," end quote. Well, that happens 5 years ago. This Monday, just 4 days ago, in the European Union Parliament, there have been a very important plenary sessions on the growth. In the session Limits to Growth, Where Do We Stand and Where Do We Go From Here, Professor and researcher Jason Hickel said, quote, "The constant hunt for more growth in the global north relies on a constant net appropriation of materials, energy, land, and labor from the territories of the global south. This drains poorer countries of resources that are necessary for developments. It colonizes their lands. It produces global inequality And it means that the social and ecological costs of growth are offshored or externalized onto vulnerable communities. Our economic system fails in both ecological and social terms. Our economic system is fundamentally undemocratic. Our productive capacities are controlled by capital and mobilized around what is profitable to capital rather than what is necessary for human well-being and ecology. We can and we must do better. We cannot just ignore science. We cannot just ignore injustice. We need solutions that deal with the ecological crisis and the social crisis together. End quote. Well, these unjust systems continue to harm life and health, not only for humans, but also for the whole planet. Looking at crisis and solutions, it is important to assess the role played by scientific journals in displaying the most important issues linked to research and action to achieve health equity and real sustainability. It is our view that not enough attention is devoted to the eco-social factors that lead to ill health, and that when it is done, the negative health consequences of inequality are often documented, but not enough attention is paid to explaining its political and economic causes and to the potential policies, interventions, and evaluations that reduce social inequality. Since the publication of its first issue in 1971, the International Journal of Health Services has made a remarkable effort to understand global health inequities, highlighting the root causes and analyzing social and health policies, as well as offering a critical view of their underlying historical, political, and environmental factors. Carlos Muntaner and I are delighted and honored to have taken the role as new co-editors-in-chief of a new journal named International Journal of Social Determinants of Health and Health Services. And although there are many ways to understand the expression social determinants of health, by this term we mean to focus on these key political, economic, cultural, and ecological determinants, the causes of the causes of the causes, as several authors, including us ourselves, have pointed out, the determinants that are driving the fate of humankind. Today's meeting aims not only to introduce, not the journal only, but also to have the opportunity to discuss with very notable speakers from across the world many of the issues I just mentioned. The aim of the meeting cannot be, of course, to get final solutions, but to promote debate, to engage in a necessarily lively discussion, searching for ideas and proposals, helping to face the many challenges that humanity is facing today. We'll have 4 sessions with debates, as well as some videos, posters, and of course the opportunity for many of us to see each other face to face, have the chance to chat, exchange ideas, proposals, worries, and also hopes. We are very grateful to all the institutions that have made it possible to organize and support this event. My universities, University Pompeu Fabra, Johns Hopkins University, SDOH, the publisher of the journal. Many thanks to Josep Lluís Martí, the professor of the Department of Law of the UPF and commissioner for the Planetary Wellbeing Project, Laia de Nadal, the new elected UPF rector, and also to our editor of SDOH, Melinda Keramat, Keisha Pollack-Porter, the chair of the Department of Health Policy and Management at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and of course, last but not least, the wonderful team in the Hopkins UPF Public Policy Center that has prepared this event. So I have to thank Guddi Singh for her invaluable help, but also Ferran Muntaner, Lucinda Cash-Gibson, Mariana Gutiérrez, Eliana Martínez, Ángela María Londoño, Josep María Caroz, Ornella Moreno, Julián Martínez, Montse López, Carola Domènech, Laila Vivas, and very especially to Ave Ribbons, who is over there, I think. This big applause goes for you, for all of you. Well, we do hope you enjoy this event, your stay in Barcelona, and we hope we are going to have a very fruitful discussions during this day. Thank you very much.
Well, benvinguts als Països Catalans, and words for all the Democrats that are in jail. After Joan, I'm going to be brief since his introduction has been very complete. I would like to point into several areas where we're going to get in the journal that differentiated, I think, greatly from the former journal. First, we're going to pay a lot of attention to global warming, the ecological crisis it produces, and their impact on social inequalities in health. Next, we are going to try to attract research on geopolitics and issues such as the risk of nuclear war, which guarantees the extermination of our species. Another area that we believe is missing from social determinants of health is to dig into the mechanisms behind the large number of associations that you find in this field. For example, domination and exploitation in the case of class and patriarchy, but also other types of relation that produce inequities, such as gender, cisgender, heterosexism, migration, nationality, the tension between the North and the South, the super exploitation really that occurs following Marini, the political economist from Brazil. And we would like also to investigate or attract papers on the philosophy of epidemiology in public health. Personally, and many will laugh at me, I don't see why it's so interested to get into counterfactuals, which to me are a fantasy and cannot be tested. This is just an example of the variations of the empiricism that has dominated the field during the last decades and remains unchallenged. And to me, it's a form of idealism with clashes with science. Next, we would like to deeper into political solutions. The amount of research that's devoted to just developing, implementing and evaluating programs and policies to reduce health inequities is minimal in this field. And most of the research is descriptive. That imbalance should be corrected, even as an ethical issue. I mean, what's the point of showing one time and again that education is associated with mortality, for example, to call on the global burden of disease? And we also depart, of course, from the GDS, the development goals, because they are linked to growth. So we think that they are incompatible with planetary health. And finally, we would like to give room and a voice to the Global South, where much of the leadership in this field has been arising. For example, the indigenous movement, as in, for example, the Palestinian case, also in Latin America, and other types of movements like the trans movement, their positions usually transcend their topic and get into our economic system as well. And well, there are interesting experiments going on today, like the tense and difficult position of Petro in Colombia that need to be documented and quantified, among others, in not only Latin America, but also Asia. So this is a blueprint of some of the areas that we prioritize. So thank you for listening, and let's start with our panels. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for such a great introduction to today's proceedings. And you're right, it is about time we started. So session 1 is going to be moderated by Joan Benach. Can we maybe start changing our panel up? The first session today is going to be called "What Do Social Determinants of Health Contribute to Health Equity?" It's going to be moderated by Joan Benach, as he's already been introduced. He is going to be joined, hopefully, by video link to Michael Marmot, who is well, he probably needs no introduction, but he is a professor at University College London and at the Institute of Health Equity, and Cristina Laurell, who I think is here. Do you want to come and join us on stage? And an independent researcher from Mexico. So Joan, I'm going to hand over to you. There will be time, I hope, for some questions from the audience. And if you please put your hand up, I'll make sure that a microphone reaches you so that you can ask the question directly. So over to you, Joan.
Well, thank you very much, Guddi. Let's start this first session. Hopefully, Michael Marmot is connected. This session deals with the necessary knowledge and action to achieve health for all in a livable world. And as I just mentioned in my introduction, we are facing many existential threats. I want to introduce this session on policy, mentioning very briefly one of the most important threats, the climate crisis. In the face of this crisis, we are facing awareness, but also hope. And for example, just a few weeks ago, the new elected president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, spoke at Stanford University, warning of issues that we don't usually hear from politicians. He said, quote, "We are living in the times that are the beginning of the extinction of mankind." You know, it's not common that politicians said that, right? There would be political action at the global scale, but this is something that our political structures cannot afford. We need to create a new space with historical perspectives. That begins with planning the transition of technological changes and moving from fossil fuel capitals to decarbonized economies. We are running out of time, end of quote. Well, the time seems to be compressing, and yet we must also reflect having an historical perspective in mind. Right or wrong, what we have done, what we have not done, what we need to do. 15 years ago, the influential WHO Commission Social Determinants of Health report, chaired by Sir Michael Marmot, stated quite a strong conclusion. The report said, social injustice is killing the population on a grand scale, and the reduction of inequities between and within countries is an ethical imperative. This unequal distribution of health damaging experiences is not in any sense a natural phenomenon, but the result of a combination of poor social policies, programs, unfair economic arrangements, bad policies. More than ever, we need fairer and more just policies. The task is difficult, and many issues, of course, remain to be carefully analyzed. That's why also we have panels on research and health services and others, and certainly implemented. In this first session, we have the fortune to have two outstanding and very well-known figures in the field of public health, in research and policy, Sir Michael Marmot and Cristina Laurell, that I'm sure they will help us to shed some light on many relevant issues related to the contribution of social determinants of health to equity. I'm going to present briefly both, and then I'm going to give the word to Sir Michael Marmot. Sir Michael Marmot is a renowned British epidemiologist, public health expert who directs the UCL Institute of Health Equity. He's largely recognized for his contributions to research on social determinants of health and health inequalities, and also for his advocacy of policies and practice to improve health equity. His research has focused on the social determinants of health, including the impact of social, economic, political factors on health outcomes. He has published numerous articles, books on topics related to health equity and social justice. He has led several major research studies at the European level or global level. Marmot has also been advisor to governments and organizations around the world on these topics, having a really influential role in shaping policies and practices aimed at reducing health inequalities globally. Asa Cristina Laurell, here beside me, prominent Mexican physician, public health expert, social activist, largely recognized for her contributions to the development of public health policies and practices that prioritize social justice and equity. She is well known for her work on the social determinants of health, including the impact of poverty, inequality, political factors on health outcomes. Aside several academic positions, she also served as director of the National Institute of Public Health in Mexico, and also as a member of the executive committee of the World Health Organization. Laurell has also been recognized for her activism, advocacy work, particularly her efforts to promote universal health access to healthcare in Mexico and other countries. And moreover, she has been involved in social and political movements in Mexico, including the Zapatista movement in Chiapas. First, Sir Michael Marmot is going to speak for about 20 minutes, then Asa Cristina Laurell for 20 minutes too, and then we will have some time for discussion and hopefully from questions from the audience. So I hope that Sir Michael Marmot is online and he can speak.
Hey, I am online. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, yes, Michael.
Good.
Go ahead,
Well,
go ahead.
Thank you. My only reluctance about this morning is that I'm not with you in person in Barcelona. Pickpockets aside, it's always a wonderful city to be in. I'm going to tell you good news and not so good news. And I'm going to indulge by starting with the origin story. When IJSDOHS was leading the Healthy Cities program at WHO Europe, he came to me and said, we've got messages about smoking, about diet, about alcohol, but could you frame messages for what you and your colleagues do? And we prepared 10 messages and we had to give it a label. So I called it Social Determinants of Health. I lay no claim to originality of that term, but when I Googled it to try and find where I got the phrase from, I kept coming back to our publications. As I say, I lay no claim to originality. It presumably was used before. The concepts go back at least to Britain in the 19th century of the determinants of health. But we used that term. We produced an Oxford University Press book with the title, Social Determinants of Health. And then the next step along this brief origins story was when WHO published the Commission on Macroeconomics and Health. And it said, classic economist viewpoint, improve health in order to get economic growth. And quite apart from whether there was a strong empirical basis for that approach, I thought it was upside down. Surely getting a stronger economy shouldn't be the aim of all our efforts. We never saw health as an instrument to some higher goal, such as economic growth. we saw health as an important social goal. And indeed, now I would embrace it as a human right, not as a means to something else. So I proposed to WHO that they set up a commission on social determinants of health, not quite in opposition to the Commission on Macroeconomics and Health, but taking a different approach. We assembled 9 knowledge networks. Joan, Benach and Carlos Muntaner were part of that, important contributors to the knowledge base, and we published our report in 2008. In one, Joan came up to me a few years later when we published the report. I said that we wanted to create a social movement. And a few years later, Joan said to me, Michael, creating a social movement isn't something you just say. There's experience at how you do this, of what social movements look like. People have knowledge about what gets them to work and otherwise. And I'm sure he's right. But in one sense, it worked. We've got this journal that's being launched today. If you look at the United States, my colleague, David Satcher, who is a member of the commission, former Surgeon General, he said he's in no doubt that it was the commission's report that led to the language of social determinants of health being in widespread use in the United States. You pick up an issue of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. They're talking about SDOH, social determinants of health. In one southern United States, when a politician was giving a reason why they did not want to accept federal funding for expansion of Medicare, he said, because the social determinants of health are more important. As a friend of mine said, the devil has the best tunes. I didn't feel I wanted to support that approach. We do need proper funding of healthcare and universal access. It's not one or the other. We obviously need both. And then we had the European region of WHO asked me to lead a commission for the European region. AHO, the American region of WHO, I led the Commission on Equity and Health Inequalities in the Americas. And then the so-called Eastern Mediterranean region of WHO. We produced our report on social, to build back fairer, the Commission on Social Determinants of Health in the Eastern Mediterranean region. I was in Tunisia this week, getting, we hope, commitment from various parts of government in Tunisia for cross-government action on social determinants of health. All of that's pretty good news. The genie is out of the bottle, the cat is out of the bag. People are talking about social determinants of health. The bad news refers to some of the things that Joan said in his introductory comments. The growth of inequality in the world, the threats to the planet of climate change, and the hollowing out of the public sector in country after country, the rise of populism and bad politics. What we said that Joan quoted from the report, a toxic combination of bad policies and programs, unfair economic arrangements, and bad politics. That's even more true today than it was in 2008. The European region of WHO recently had a high-level meeting on the well-being economy. I was invited the Prime Minister of Iceland opened the first day, and I got a letter inviting me to open the second day with an inspirational speech from 9:05 to 9:10. I'm not quite sure what I was supposed to do in 5 minutes, but never mind. And the challenge I put to the European countries represented was threefold. First, intergenerational equity. Second, action on the social determinants of health. And third, rediscovering public purpose. Let's take the first, intergenerational equity. The Gallup organization surveys people in different countries, right across Europe, in country after country, in Europe, and to greater or lesser extent in other parts of the world. When you ask people, will today's children have a better life or a worse life than their parents? A minority, a small minority, think that today's children will have a better life than their parents. Certainly in Europe, in country after country, people today, adults, say that children will have a worse life than their parents. Good heavens. The post-war consensus was that children will have a better life than their parents. In the United States, for example, it was true. In the cohort born after World War II, the baby boomers, 80% of children had higher income than their parents. In the cohort born in the 1980s, nearly 40 years later, it's 50-50. In other words, half of children, when they become adults, will have a lower income than their parents. That's a complete fracturing of the American dream. You're supposed to work hard in a unionized industry, have a cottage by the lake, your kids go to college, and life's much better. And now the objective reality is that's not true for half the population. And in country after country, the majority of the population think that their kids will have a worse life than they do. If we add the climate emergency to that, it's really true. If we really ruin the planet, our kids will have a much worse life than we do. Let's look at some figures for social mobility. At the current rate of social mobility, if you're in the bottom 10% of income in Denmark, it will take about 2 generations to get up to the median at the current rate of social mobility. In Norway, Finland, Sweden, it'll take about 3 generations to get from low income to median income. In the UK and the US, it'll take 5 generations. In Brazil, 9 generations. What accounts for this difference? 2 related things account for this difference. One, the magnitude of income and social inequalities. The greater the inequalities, the greater the distance between the rungs of the ladder, the more difficult it is to get from one rung to the next. And the other is investment in early childhood. If we look at OECD figures, the average spend on children age 0 to 5 is $6,000 per child per year. In Norway, they spend $12,000 per child per year. The average is 6. The UK spends $4,000 per child per year. The US spends $3,000. So we're not investing in the next generation, and that's fundamental to their health and to health equity. I was quoted in Britain recently saying the reason that I would never get elected as a politician is that I think we ought to pay more tax and spend some of that money on reducing child poverty and improving conditions for children. The problem is we are heading in a Brazilian direction, not in a Danish direction. By increasing inequality, by failure to spend on early childhood, we're going to look more like Brazil, not more like Denmark. So that's the first challenge. The second, and it flows from the first, is action on the social determinants of health. There've been, to pick up Joan's theme, there've been 3 recent challenges globally. The first is, after the global financial crisis, country after country indulged in austerity. Britain was an extreme case, and a dozen years of austerity led to a slowdown in improvement in life expectancy, an increase in inequalities, and life expectancy for the poorest people went down, got worse. The chances of people leading a healthy life diminished if you were in the most deprived 10, 20%. And we've got good reason to believe that the politics and economics of austerity played a key role in that. The second challenge was the pandemic. And we said, and the evidence proved it to be the case, the pandemic would expose the underlying inequalities in society and amplify them. And so it proved. And then the cost of living crisis. But the cost of living crisis does not affect people equally. The lower the income, the higher the proportion of your income you spend on food and home heating. And inflation particularly hit food and energy. So it means an inflation rate of, say, 9% for the population is something like 17% for the poorest quintile. And that means people will shiver in their homes, they'll eat poorly. We need action on the social determinants of health. And we've laid that out. The depressing picture is, just to take my own country, the government, the national government in Westminster, has not only ignored the recommendations that I made in my 2010 Marmot review for the UK, they've galloped off in the opposite direction. Child poverty has gone up, spending on education has gone down, spending on local government has gone down in a regressive way. They've really galloped off in the wrong direction. Housing has become less affordable. Welfare payments have gone down. It really is crisis. That's pretty grim, pretty depressing. The good news is that after my 2010 Marmot review, the city of Coventry declared themselves a Marmot city. They took the 6 domains of recommendations I made: give every child the best start in life, education and lifelong learning. Number 3, employment and working conditions. Number 4, healthy and sustainable, having enough money to lead a healthy life. Number 5, healthy and sustainable places in which to live and work. And 6, addressing the causes of lifestyle. And they said, we'll do it at a city level. That was Coventry. Greater Manchester said, if Coventry can do it, we'll become a Manchester City region. Cheshire and Merseyside, Lancashire and Cumbria. We've got 40 local authorities that are taking what they call Marmot action. When I finished the meeting this morning, I'll be editing our report for Gwent, the first Marmot region in Wales. It's pretty exciting. It means that we want national government, of course, to act. But if we can't get national government to act, let's get city, regional, local government to act. We want both. And the third challenge is to rediscover public purpose. The neoliberal agenda means that people have been committed to leaving everything to the market. The role of government, if at all, is to correct market failures. And a free market fundamentalist might acknowledge that global warming is a market failure, so it needs a little bit of government action. We need a totally different approach. In rediscovering public purpose, that just leaving things to the market isn't going to solve the problems of inequities, of climate crisis, of health inequities. And the role of government is not just to correct market failure, but to take a whole new approach to re-establishing public purpose. Mariana Mazzucato recently published a book called The Big Con about the rise of the consulting industry. She points out with her co-author that in 2021, the global spend on consultancies was between $700 and $900 billion a year. In other words, it's saying we don't employ people anymore who can think strategically. We have to get McKinsey in to do the strategic thinking for us. This is, I don't want to comment on whether McKinsey does it well or badly, but the whole idea that we no longer trust anybody working in the public sector to take a strategic approach to what constitutes the good society suggests a terrible failure to recognize the importance of the public good. So I'm absolutely delighted there's this new journal with the title that it has. I couldn't be more pleased that people around the world are discussing social determinants of health. The challenges we face are huge, but working in this domain, dealing with the issues of intergenerational equity, of working on social determinants of health, of rediscovering public purpose, gives us good grounds for hope for the future. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. I think that what was posed by Michael is a very broad view, but also is a view from highly developed countries that are getting into trouble with social determinants of health. I think that the primary change in how it was looked at social determinants of health came very much from poor countries. I'm not going to call them underdeveloped, but less well-developed countries from the point of view of what was thought of as development, that's economic growth. And I would like to tell you that I'm working as a high up leader of the Mexican social security system. Then we have to face a lot of questions that I would like to pose to you today. One first question that is important is the relation between social and biological processes. It's clear, and I will not speak much more about it, that very social processes seem to transform biological processes. And if we don't get further into that question, we probably will not have too much to get together between the social and the biological. The second question that I will touch is the relation that we have to the medical model. The third is the problems in decision-making in the public sector and the setting of priorities. Because I think that to start off with, one of the things the COVID pandemic made a change in the change and the reorganization of the urban space, that we could see very clear the social transforms biological processes. I mean, the COVID was, it's called our attention in the sense that what we saw was two things that were very important. One is that it had been said that we will probably have very soon a pandemic. Mike Davis overall told us that we were just waiting for a pandemic and we didn't do anything about it. And that also had to do with the reorganization of the social space of cities. The second question that I think is very important is that I said is related to the medical model. I think that one of the things that we have not been quite clear about, I mean, I think that most of us who are here today are quite clear on the point that the social situation of persons and groups give outcome in the health equity. But one of the things that we have not taken too seriously is a question that the medical model is very dominant in the sense that it coincides with the idea of the public that if you have health problems, you want drugs and you want hospitalization. And although all of us are saying that prevention and promotion is very important, anyhow, it seems to me that those health promotion, health education, prevention is perceived as a different space of human activity, in the sense that although we are saying every day that we have to need change in how people behave, nevertheless, diabetes, hypertension, obesity is going up, 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 and up. And that probably is because there is not a coincidence between what politicians think about health issues, that is essentially the medical model, and also the public does the same. And then the question is, how do you break this relationship between what is thought of as what the state, the public institution should do about what is to better what is called the lifestyles of the population, when it's very clear that the lifestyle of population has much to do with social class, much less to do with information about what you should do. And if we actually are thinking about how could we change the perception, we have to break down both in politicians and also in common sense, what is thought of as what the public institutions should do about social determinants of health that actually boils down to we should have a much larger social investment so that we could have people getting less. We should attack poverty, we should attack different class differences, we should take on the housing problem, we should take on the what should we eat and what should we not eat. And that actually is not happening, which also means that we have a clear, although a city may take on, like Manchester, some part of this, if you don't take it on at the global level, you will have much less impact, because it's clear. I'm working in a high middle income country, and we actually have many practical problems that we have to face. One, for example, is how to distribute the social investment. Should it go to health? Should it go primarily to education? Should it go to increase of wages, or what should go to health? That means that we have to take a decision on that kind of we have to take decisions of how to use what we could call the social budget, which also actually has to do directly how progressive should taxes be. And there I would like to call the attention that there is in Europe and in the United States, everybody speaks about populism as if it would be necessarily a negative factor, and they think about authoritarianism, and they don't think about populism, a progressive populism that is actually turning the main purpose of the state from what is making the rich richer and trying to see how you could better the life of the poor, which also may lead to something that, to my understanding, is very important, which is that we need to work in a sense so that the public good turns into common sense, so to speak, which has to do with what politicians think about the medical model, and also has to do what the people generally think about the medical model. And we have actually been very bad at taking on and resolve this problem. It might have happened in smaller groups or in public and political context, but as breaking through on a broader level actually has not been very, we have not been very successful. If you ask a common person in the street what they need for their health, they almost sure answer, I need drugs, and if I'm really sick, I need a doctor and to get hospitalized. And that is what we have to break, because otherwise it will not become, so to speak, a movement towards what is how to change what are the global determinants of health. In my experience, although people are progressive, they elect a progressive government, they change very little their opinion about what is that should be done in the health field to have less health inequity, and also to have better health in general. In that sense, if you work out from government in a leading position to better better life conditions and to bring out and speak about promotion and health education. You have, if you don't do it on a very broad level, you probably will have little impact on what people are thinking about, what are the social determinants of health. And they think that for example, sports and working out is something that belongs to another sphere of life that has nothing to do with health as a government task. And so I think that we should take on a global view. I agree that the climate change is evidently getting it might kill us all, overall the younger generations. And I also think that we need to have we need to get health into the political discourse, because if we don't manage to get that into the political discourse, also we will continue to have this split between what politicians and people think about health as drugs and health technology, and what actually is what has an impact on health that, apart from poverty, etc. That is promotion and health education. They perceive that as two things that has nothing to do between them. And then we will not be able to create a public discourse and a public value that has to do with this problem, with getting together again what has been seen as differentiated in today everyday life. So I think that our big struggle is to get to explain and also change the medical discourse, the medical model that undoubtedly has, for example, in the COVID pandemic, it's clear that we needed hospitals, we needed health technology, because otherwise we would have lost even more lives. But also it's a fact that we have to create a new public discourse, and we have to convince politicians that discourse should not see health as equivalent of drugs and hospitals and health technology, because if we continue on that line or that road, what we do actually is that we are creating a huge market for the pharmacological industry, a huge market for health technology, and also a huge market for changing the technology each 10 years. So I think that we have to be even more we have to really try to turn health into a political issue, but interpret it in a different manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Sasa Cristina, for your very interesting thoughts. So we have something like 40 minutes, which is good. There are many questions or many issues that we would like to ask or reflect. So let me make a couple of questions, and then after that, let's leave space for the audience to also to make questions. One question I would like to ask, first maybe to Michael, but also to Sasa Cristina, of course, if you want to add in the conversation. One is in the interplay between research and policy, of course, there are many issues that needs to be addressed and improved. And I would like particularly to focus on 2 points that I think are important. The first point was mentioned by Josep Lluís Martí in his speech in the very beginning, is the issue of transdisciplinarity. I think that today we live in a very, very complex world in which we realize that all things are connected or interconnected more than ever. And the ecology, of course, is a very important thing here. But there is a gap, I think, in the terms of knowledge, the specialization of all the people involved in research and policy. Everyone tries to know something very specific. And it's very hard to find people who come from natural sciences or even from epidemiologists or people in public health who are very specialist. And it's difficult to take the approach of a global understanding of the problems that generate health issues. So this connection or this discussion between the natural sciences and the social sciences in general, I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge in theory and it's a challenge in practice, right? So I would argue, and I would like to know your thoughts, Michael and Asa Cristina. I would argue that we are today, even with all the claims about transdisciplinarity, etc., or interdisciplinarity, that we are under an incomplete transdisciplinarity, because even approaches, very interesting approaches like One Health or planetary health or planetary well-being, I think important pieces of the approach are missing. And I specifically refer to some of the issues we mentioned this morning, some political issues, some structural issues. And that's the second part I want to ask you. The second part is that, okay, we have a lot of information, descriptive information. Of course, we need much more, especially in low-income countries. We need to explain what's going on, and social determinants of health is key here. But my view, and I would like to know your views, is that the WHO is responsible for doing this or for doing that. And also structural issues that are behind many of the problems we are facing are quite underdeveloped sometimes, and other times are really unfocused. And I'm going to give you, one example, of course, is the approach that very often economists have, which very often do not know nothing, almost nothing about ecology. So in an economist that know nothing about ecology is really very problematic. So I think that here we have a lot of issues to reflect on, and I would like to know your thoughts.
Well, very interesting, much to say. The transdisciplinarity. The last time I was remotely in Barcelona, again via video link, not in person, there was a distinguished economist that I was debating with. And this distinguished economist said, pretty well, I'm quoting now, "You don't know anything. You don't know anything. You can't be recommending any action because you have no knowledge. You're totally ignorant." And I'm not exaggerating very much. What he meant was, you've got to have some giant econometric model and show that the arrow going from early childhood to education, it's got a coefficient of 0.0002, and then from education to employment's got a coefficient of 0.0004, and then from employment to health, and it's got a coefficient, and you control for all the variables. And he said, you haven't done that, you don't know anything. My response was somewhat robust. I said, we know that children growing up in poverty do less well on early child development. We know if they grow up in cold homes, their lungs are damaged, and that their early child development is compromised. They have more likelihood of mental illness. Are you saying we don't know anything? You think that unless you've got one giant econometric model, that all the research showing that children's lungs are damaged by air pollution, by cold, by mold. None of that counts for anything because we haven't put it in one giant econometric model. You can't be serious. Are you saying that children who suffer adverse childhood experiences, whose parents abuse them physically, whose parents are addicted to drugs and alcohol, who've been locked up in prison, that the damaging effect on children's development, we don't know anything because we can't put that into one giant econometric model? You can't be serious. Are you seriously saying that we don't know anything because we haven't got one of your ridiculous models with your coefficients? Well, he was saying that. I said, fine, you get an army of PhD students to work on this for the next 30 years. And meanwhile, those of us who are concerned about improving health will take the evidence we have and we'll try to apply it. So that's one problem. You know that we all know that the way we organize our affairs economically is vital to health. It's part of the political, social, commercial, economic, however we want to describe it, determinants of health. But too rarely do we get the economists trying to think in a common sense way about what the nature of evidence is. I mean, I was involved in a debate at the London School of Economics a couple of weeks ago, where the economists had written a paper about health, and they said, oh, the evidence for social determinants of health is disputed. It's difficult to know how you'd act on it. Therefore, let's talk about organizing health services. Well, I'm very happy for people to talk about organizing health services, but not the therefore, not because we don't know anything about social determinants of health. It's just completely wrong-headed, and it shows the problem of transdisciplinary work. On the other hand, when economists like Anne Case and Angus Deaton look at the rise in mortality in the United States, from poisonings to opioids, suicide, alcohol-related causes, and they label it deaths of despair. And then they do what most of us in this room would probably call social epidemiology. They don't acknowledge epidemiology, but nevertheless they do it. It makes a major difference. Here they are talking about deaths of despair because of the plight of people without a college degree in the United States. So that's one problem. The second one that you raised about the natural sciences. Several years ago, the Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford, John Bell, invited me to have a public debate with him. And he would take the view that the future of health will be personalized medicine based on our understanding of the genome. And he invited me to take the opposite view, that it would be based on our understanding of public health. And I trusted him that he wasn't just setting me up. But, you know, the fact that he was inviting me to debate publicly with him meant that he had respect, that there was more than one viewpoint. So he went first, and he said that it may have changed since that time, but he said genetically there are 4 different subtypes of diabetes. And based on our understanding of these genetically different subtypes, the treatment for diabetes will be tailored, whether it's on insulin resistance or different parts of the pathway, and that'll be the future. And I then said, well, look, if you look at twin studies, you could say that obesity is 80% heritable. And we know obesity predicts diabetes. And it's twin studies say it's between 60 and 80% heritable. If you look at studies of South Asians living in West London compared with South Asians living in India, the difference in mean body mass index is enormous. You could say it's 80% obesity is 80% environmental. So now we can explain 160% of the variance. And I said, it's complete nonsense. If you control the environment, it's 100% heritable. If you control the genes, it's 100% environmental. We need to stand back a little bit. And then I showed those famous graphs that come from CDC in the US about the prevalence of obesity by state year on year, and the dramatic increase in obesity. And I said, I don't know which genetic subtype of diabetes will follow this obesity epidemic, but by golly, there will be a diabetes epidemic following the obesity epidemic. So I think the science is dazzling. We do need to understand the basic biological pathways, but we've somehow got to put it together, the understanding of the social, environmental causes and the basic biology. And as long as we're proceeding on separate pathways, those of us who are committed to looking at the social, environmental causes, we lose something if we don't understand the biology. And those who think causes are subcellular mechanisms lose something if they don't raise their gaze outside the laboratory. So yeah, we need to be talking to each other and sharing our understanding. And it relates to what as Laurell said, that if I understood you correctly, if you ask people in the street about health, they talk about the need to get pharmaceuticals and to see a doctor. They don't talk about housing. They don't talk about conditions to raise their children or having enough money to make ends meet, which are the key causes of health and ill health, not just seeing a doctor. So we really need to be thinking not just about how we cross these transdisciplinary barriers, but how we communicate effectively to the public. On your second, Joan, who's responsible? And here it's difficult. I think we all recognize the importance of politics and how you get political change. I often get asked, how do you get political change? And my honest answer is I haven't a clue. I don't know. I'm sure social movements are important, but how do we get in an era of post-truth politics, whether it's Brexit or Trump or what's going on in many low and middle income countries, how you get the people who are making these big decisions responsible for our lives to address some of the key issues. I mean, in the British Parliament on Wednesday, every week we have this ritual of Prime Minister's question time. The Prime Minister is in Japan at the moment for the G7 summit. So the Deputy Prime Minister stood in, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition said in Parliament, Sir Michael Marmot talked about the importance of child poverty, and now Sir Michael says child poverty is set to rise. What are you going to do about it? So I thought, good, it's being discussed in Parliament. And then the Deputy Prime Minister said he went to a comprehensive school and Jeremy Corbyn was a terrible person, and another set of non sequiturs. So at least one of the political parties is discussing social determinants of health, even if the one in government doesn't want to engage with the discussion. But so it comes back to my view that the evidence is really important, but how you go from the evidence to getting the social action, that's much more complicated. And that's why I finished my brief introduction by talking about the excitement of working with city government and regional government, where the politicians at that level have taken this on board because they're much closer to the understanding of the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age, the social determinants of health, and that they're much more minded to act on it. But of course, they're acting against the headwinds of national policy.
Thank you very much, Michael, for all your comments. Maybe you want to add something, but actually I have a question related to the last part of Michael, so maybe...
No, I would like to make a very short intervention concerning this question. That are actually methodological, the intervention that I want to do. I think that there is a difference between interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, because if you're speaking about transdisciplinarity, actually what you do is that you make different sciences converge on an object that you want to study. And that's different from interdisciplinary, because then each researcher formulates his own question that is very much influenced by his personal or his scientific understanding of those questions. And so I think that we should actually think or rethink what is transdisciplinarity. And the second thing I want to say is that the descriptive information is incomplete, because that actually goes back to statistics and probability. And I think in that sense also you should rework what is scientific evidence. Is that just that you have that you can show with statistics that there is a difference, or you have to get much deeper into the understanding of the phenomena. And I would say that one of our problems in science today, what is considered science, has to do with that science is actually understood as mathematical modeling. And I would say that that is a very restricted understanding of what is actually science. That would be my...
Yeah, I would like to mention the last part of what Michael was saying about how to translate this evidence or this knowledge into action, because you, Cristina, have a very comprehensive view of public health through your studies, medicine, epidemiology, sociology. But also for many years, you have had experience on policy and politics, right? So I would like to know your thoughts on the problems and challenges, but also the opportunities when we try to move from policy to the real politics. Why is it so difficult to implement policies? What is needed? So this question that also Michael was mentioning, especially in high-income countries, because, for example, in terms of climate change, they are basically responsible of most of the problem we are facing. So they have to change. Of course, other countries need to change too, perhaps, right? But what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that that has to do with, actually, it's building on what I said earlier, because if you have a very restrictive understanding of what are the causes, it's very difficult to translate it into politics. I mean, you have to work on a broader scale so that you have, I wouldn't say that you have politicians that understand social determinants of health, but you have the possibility to make a political discourse where it's part of this discourse is what has to do with why do people need why do you have to make policies that bring people out of poverty and also that makes the society more equal. And I think that that is one of the problems that the highly developed countries have not posed as a problem, actually. But that if you can, even if you can show, as Michael is saying, that the children of that it will fare worse than their parents, that is in some parts of society is actually understood as a fact, but in the part of a society that's more influential in politics, that is not recognized. And that has to do with, and I'm sorry to say it like in these words, but I think we should bring them back into the discussion. That has to do with ideology. You think that the maximum value of a society is to grow and grow faster, or you think that the main value of a society is that people are getting more equal and have the same, they're getting more and more the possibility of having the same possibilities for that a better life. And so I think that that is actually, we are stuck in a certain sense in what is the values of the broad values of societies that are different in developed countries than in countries. I mean, Mexico, where I come from and where I work, is a high middle income country in the classification of the World Bank. So we are, so to speak, much ahead of what would be African countries, majority of African countries. And for example, Brazil was turned in with a new president, as Bolsonaro, turned down in 40 years everything that was done by Lula. And then I think, I mean, it's much more than how could you understand those contradictions inside the country, and how do you turn them into political issues? That would be my answer.
Joan,
Yes.
I can see there's a lot of people who
A
want
lot
to
of
ask questions.
Okay, so yeah, go
I'm
ahead,
sorry
go
to
ahead.
no, you can by all means,
No,
if
no,
there's anyone you'd like
go
to
ahead.
pick on. But, and there's already a hand up there, there's the hand down there. We're gonna get a woman to speak first.
More or less.
It's working.
Thank you for these fantastic presentations and discussion. One of the things we haven't discussed are the commercial influences. And the question Michael was saying, well, he doesn't know why the politician, your question, I think, was why is our knowledge not being implemented and political change? And I take a very simplistic view that we have got enormous corruption going on. We have corruption of the science and through the pharmaceutical industry. We have corruption of our medical journals, which is why it's so important to have this journal. Corruption of thought, our scientists, the modeling is being driven by commercial influences that want a certain outcome. So that conceals and confuses. But also we have very corrupt politicians. In the UK, in the House of Lords, the politicians that are voting through the marketization, the public sector reforms, many of them are sitting on the boards of companies that are actively reaping the profits. And we have an era of politicians that are not interested in political change and inequality. They're interested in themselves. And I think one of the duties of journals and researchers now, although it's increasingly difficult to do, is to expose this. So Michael, you're now on the BMJ Commission for the NHS, which I've not been invited onto, but you're on it. And so actually I see your job now is exposing the amount of marketization and the corruption and what's going on in political life. Because until these politicians are embarrassed, we will not get any political change and we will be sitting in our wings and in our ivory towers. Apologies for this. But maybe you could respond to the commercial determinants and influences.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anyone wants to respond briefly so we can allow for more questions?
I totally agree with what you are saying. I think that the commercial interests are driving development. And in that sense, it's very important to expose it. And you can do that as a politician, or you could do that as a scientist. And I think that one of the big confrontations for example, in Latin America, where 5 progressive governments has won in the last year, is because of exposing the problem of corruption and how the commercial interests are actually driving the development in our countries.
Michael, any quick thoughts?
Well, not quick thoughts, but I'll try and make it quick.
Sorry about that.
Alison's absolutely right. When I was chairing the WHO Commission for the Eastern Mediterranean region, North Africa and the Middle East, we did talk about corruption. And I was asked, well, what do you mean by corruption? I said, well, for example, if a minister of the cabinet arranges for his pub landlord to get a contract to deliver PPE, personal protective equipment, to the government in a pandemic, or a company that his sister has shares in, or when Winston Churchill's grandson leads a corporation that gets vast numbers of public contracts. That's what I mean by corruption. And of course, I'm talking about the United Kingdom, not countries in North Africa and the Middle East. So yeah, corruption's widespread, and it's not unique to low and middle income countries. We see it in high income countries in an insidious way. And Alison's referring not just to what I've just said now are obvious examples of corruption, but the influence in politics. And, it would be hard to say which was the worst decision of the US Supreme Court in recent years, because they keep competing to outdo themselves in one bad decision after another. But one of the worst was saying that corporations are people and they can give unlimited amounts of money to politics, which of course totally distorts US politics, because money is everything. Because one of the big issues, and what you just said about 5 progressive governments in Latin America gives grounds for hope. One of the big issues is the failure of our democracy. if people understood all this, they really wouldn't like it. The idea that our society is rigged in favor of some commercial interests. They really wouldn't like it if most people really understood it. So once again, we need to improve our democratic governance. And I think as when you talked about making populism real, I mean, populism has come to mean deluding large numbers of the population rather than listening to people and working with people to address their concerns. So we've got a big challenge of improving our democracies, and one of the results of that will be weeding out both types of corruption, the special interests and the breaking of the law.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. This is Jorge Alejandro from WHO Barcelona office, Health System Financing. I was really great by two phrases or statements. One from Michael on rediscovering the role of the state or of the public, and also about your concept, Ana Cristina, on progressive populism. So I would like to unpack them a little bit more, but also I think it's very difficult to work on this rediscovery when we as citizens cannot detach really the figure of individuals acting corruptly, but with the figure of the public mission to really act on behalf of what's on everyone's interest and rights. So any further thoughts on what's really the role of the state right now, or the role of the public, or that public purpose? What should it be? And whether, Ana Cristina, for instance, you think that public purpose should also act on that way of progressive populism, like really redefining that approach to society? Over.
Well, one of the things that I think that one should question many things that are happening in our countries, one thing is that what we understand with democracy, that they have been elected in an election where there's a lot of money coming in to fortify certain kind of, which you called corruption, which is corruption actually. And then that means that there is not the democratic struggle has to be around issue much more than how much propaganda you can do for your party, etc. And I think that is what has happened in Latin America after it's like a backlash on neoliberal politics that has been going on, that has been very devastating for most countries. And Latin America is not Africa. I mean, it's middle upper income countries to a large degree. Chile is probably one of it's a great example of that. It has a per capita income that's much higher than the rest of Latin America. And nevertheless, with a big popular movement of young people, they elected a new progressive government that anyhow is having a lot of trouble to change the laws and the possibilities to take away, for example, what is the private sector in medicine that was by law installed with Pinochet. And so I think that one of the things that we should do is that try to make politics that is actually much more concerns, not that concerns what is the good of the people and what our people need to have a good life. I mean, it's a very synthetic way of saying it, but I think that that is actually what is happening in Latin America and this place, at this point. And you should not be surprised if there are legal, technical coup d'etats in Latin America. I mean, that's quite possible because how things are coming around. And that is very much based on saying that those are populist and they are not democratic, so they should be overturned. And that has happened in Brazil, actually. That was a legal coup d'etat. And that probably could happen again in Chile, and that could happen. Well, it could happen in Mexico. I don't think it will happen in Mexico because the government has a very strong grassroots support. So it would be very difficult that it happens. That would be my answer.
Michael? Yeah, I've already said that I don't know how to get political change. So let me talk about it at a slightly one step removed. If you have an argument with people of goodwill, that limits the discussion enormously, but with people of goodwill. So somebody of libertarian bent will give emphasis to individual liberties and will say the values of a society are those that put emphasis on individual liberty. Somebody of left of center, more social democratic bent would say, no, the values of society are the public good, the common good, and that takes social action. Well, we can have a reasonable discussion. Now, my way into that discussion is to say, let's look at health as an outcome. So take the example of food. And let me give you an example from Britain. So politicians of the right say healthy eating is a matter of individual choice. The state shouldn't be telling people what to eat. And it's up to individuals. It's a matter of personal responsibility. And I have to say, surveys of the public say the public thinks that health is a matter of individual responsibility. Well, we published data showing that if you're in the bottom 10% of household income, to follow the healthy eating guidance, you would have to spend 74% of your income on food. If you're in the top 10%, you'd only spend 6% of your income on food. So I would say to the libertarian, yep, for people in the top 10%, healthy eating is a matter of individual responsibility. I mean, marketing availability and the like as well, of course, but individual responsibility. But for people in the bottom 10%, don't tell them to exercise individual responsibility, and that's why they feed their children bad food. It's not poor people that are to blame, it's their poverty that is to blame. Now, so I would argue that taking health as an outcome is a way to have, to go beyond this rather abstract discussion of individual rights on one hand and social action on the other. And I've quoted Amartya Sen many times, talking about creating the conditions for people to lead lives they have reason to value. So I can't decide what is a good life for somebody else, but I can decide that we need to create the conditions where people can take those decisions for themselves. And poverty deprives people of any possibility to choose. Go back to what Alison said about creating a health service that no longer meets people's needs. because it meets the needs of private corporations. That takes away people's ability to choose lives they have reason to value. It means they can no longer be the central actors in their own life story. So I think we can go beyond these sterile debates about does the right promote liberty and the left promote social action, to say we need social action. We absolutely, that's what the evidence shows. We actually need social action. That's what I mean by rediscovering public purpose. But that public purpose is to create the conditions for them to lead their own chosen life path, lives they have reason to value. And so my argument against the libertarian is your way of organizing society may be okay if you're rich, but it's not terribly good if you're in the bottom half of the distribution, and it won't even meet your own needs to get economic growth. I've been quoting an IMF report that they looked at something like 40 plus countries. And if you ask what are the best correlates of economic growth, leaving the climate damage out for the moment, because the growth has to be sustainable, but what are the best correlates of economic growth? And this report said that making the top 10% richer does just that. It makes the top 10% richer. In fact, it has a negative correlation with economic growth. The way to get economic growth is to make the poorest 60% richer. And it makes sense. If the poor can't buy shoes for their children, or they can't paint the kitchen, how is the economy going to grow? Now, let's say it's got to be sustainable growth. So my approach is, yes, of course, ideology of public purpose, but we can actually use the evidence to influence the argument if, and it's a big if, people are of good faith. And of course, the major challenge is that people aren't of good faith. And that means that the argument based on evidence has its limits. But that's why I like the hopeful messages coming out of Latin America. Get the people engaged, actually deal with the issue of communication. We can make a difference. I mean, I had a senior politician in Britain ask me not long ago, he said, look, we're good people and we can't get our ideas across. What can you tell us? And I said, I can't tell you anything. I can't tell politicians what to do. I can tell you what I do. I tell the truth. I argue from the evidence. And I engage people in a conversation about social justice. I think that's where we need to be. Tell the truth, argue from the evidence, and be working for the goal of social justice.
Okay, I think I'm afraid we are... One more question? Okay. Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question for the panelists, and I congratulate the organizers on a phenomenal event today. My name is Tanya Zackerson. I'm a trauma surgeon on the south side of Chicago, where, shocker, gunshot wounds is our #1 mechanism of injury for any trauma patient coming in. Obviously, it's all a result of social determinants of health that are not being met. Now, a lot of us have started to think, thanks to the work that you've all done, in not just the social determinants of health, but also the structural determinants of health. The question, why don't my patients have access to the basic necessities of a life of dignity? Is this a semantic debate, or I'd love to know your collective opinions, and I open up the question to the room about how do we shift upstream to talk about those structures in place that prevent the social determinants of health from being realized in our patient population? Should we be talking about that term? or not, or is that embedded within the social determinants of health? And I think we've been hearing from that from people and speakers today already, but congratulations. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if we have enough time to respond to this question, but anyhow, I think there is going to be a lot of room in the other sessions to continue the conversations. I think there are many topics to keep thinking. Evidence, corruption has been there. Also, power structures, other issues that are going to be covered. So I want to thank very much to Michael and Cristina for their many thoughtful reflections, comments, ideas, challenges. And I want to end with two final remarks on health equity that probably open the door for the next session. One comes from Vandana Shiva, the very interesting, famous Vandana Shiva physicist, ecologist. She says, health inequalities are a most compelling global social justice problem and provide one of the best available sources of evidence for describing and explaining how well-being and justice are unequally distributed globally. The other quote, and I hope he is not embarrassed, he's around, Carlos, is a quote from him, I think opens the door for the next session. Carlos says, wrote 10 years ago in a very interesting paper, failing to account for social relations has resulted in large amounts of data without much explanatory power and an overall lack of support for policy interventions that reduce social inequities in health. Okay, I leave it here with all the thoughts. I thank you again very much, Michael, for your presentation here online, and of course, Cristina. So I want to thank here, and let's take a break with a good clap for them.